Okay, how's it going, folks? I'm Shiyan, a partner at Hustle Fund, and I'm so happy to be joined by Tobias from Atono. And today we're going to be talking about all the latest and greatest in AI tips and tricks from a true practitioner, but also from someone who is really trying to help other companies adopt the latest skills and practices, which is rapidly changing under our feet, right? I think everyone feels like each model update unveils new capabilities, and we're just finding myriad ways to put all of these capabilities into practice. So Tobias, maybe you can share a little bit about your role at Atono and how you're implementing AI currently in your organization as things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, so a quick bit about my background. So I've been in software for 25 years, maybe more. I don't like to publicly admit that, but it's true. And so in that time period, I've done quite a few different roles from a developer. I've gotten quite a bit into operations, testing, management, quite a bit into product as well. And my current role as CTO is not as a hands-on coder. I'm not coding every day or any day. I'm much more involved on the product side. What I'd like to share today is more around how, as a product person or adjacent to design, what recent developments in AI technology have helped and accelerated, and some things that still really don't work. Yeah, so that's the context. And yeah, here at Atono, I'm mostly on the product side. Of course, I dabble in everything and have a view to how things are, how AI is impacting the other disciplines, but I'm not a practitioner in those disciplines, so I don't want to flex my ignorance too publicly on those things.
I think we're just all learning together. I was chatting with one of our founders this morning who's very technical, and he said, if 6 months ago you told me that Claude could write code as well as me, I wouldn't have believed you.
Absolutely. That may have literally happened for me. Not write code as good as I do, but code as good as senior engineers. I literally said that will never happen, and here we are.
Yeah. And so maybe like for you, what helped you change your mind? When did it really click that you're like, oh man, maybe I need to think about the world a little bit differently?
I'll have to give credit to my counterpart, the chief product officer at Atono, in pushing me in that direction. I'm a skeptic by nature. I do think I am an innovative person, but early experiments with using AI were very disappointing, like self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, it's not going to be that good. And of course I tried it and it's not that good. So move on. But things change very quickly. So yeah, my colleague is Doug Pete, and he said, you got to try this again. And was showing me some of the designs that he was able to quickly mock up with some pretty basic prompts. And so I had to give it another go. And yeah, very surprising, very labor saving. And I had to eat a bit of crow there for sure.
And how has it changed your workflows now that you are now a believer in the capabilities?
I'm still a skeptic at heart, so we'll get to that part. But for sure, let's rewind 5 years ago. I was using Balsamiq for mockups quite a bit, and no shade on Balsamiq, but the way that I would create mockups back in that day are very laborious. As easy as Balsamiq is to use, you have to think about it, not pixel perfect or anything like that, but you still have to think about layout. And there is a lot of work to the point where most of the time I wouldn't do it. I would just prefer to work with a designer and jam and offload the labor to the designer, basically. So probably the workflows that have been most impacted are backing up from design a little bit. I'm mostly a Claude user, and having Claude look at a broad product goal that I have and suggesting where I may have missed some user stories has been very good. I would say the hit rate is low. Like maybe Claude would suggest 10 additional stories and I'd take 2 of them, but that's good value for me. I can quickly go through those 10, reject the 8, and I never would have thought of those 2. So that, even though it's not perfect and it's not giving me perfect results, just showing the gaps like that is very useful. Similarly, missing acceptance criteria within stories. Again, the existing acceptance criteria where I've maybe gone a little too fast and said something that's somewhat unclear, Claude is very good at pointing out where that's occurred, and I can go in and quickly elucidate my point a little more clearly. So that's on the authoring side that I've found Claude to be a good companion. And where there's a huge amount of labor saving is in creating mockups. So being able to take an existing screenshot from Atono, feed it to Claude and say, I want to make this modification, and getting a screenshot back. With that modification, I get a very good hit rate on that. Definitely good enough to pass to a designer for an actual design that's ready to implement. So
can you foresee skipping the designer step, that you get back the mockup and then you can go straight to feature development and then a pull request?
I'm sure that is possible. I know companies are doing that. We are really committed to UX at Atono, and for me, it's definitely not good enough yet. So what I've found is that getting a design to what I consider like a 90% level is amazingly fast. I can't believe I did that with just a simple prompt. And then getting it from 90% to 100% is, I would say, impossible. In fact, as I start iterating and pointing out small details that I want changed, things tend to go very wrong. I'm not sure why that is. It's very interesting, but yeah, the initial, like what I would call an MVP design, very easy to get to. A final polished design, really difficult. And sometimes when you're trying to make small changes to a particular part of a design, things that you previously liked change. And then so you're really struggling to try and get to that 100% perfect design. So yeah, for me, not yet. And also we have great designers at Atono, and they have lots of insights that I don't and Claude doesn't have. And so yeah, not yet.
And what do your designers think of this new workflow with you producing the 90% mockup?
I think I won't speak for them, but I would say very positive, in the sense that the principal designer that I work with, Heather, thinks visually. And for me to try and describe a visual concept through words is a lot less efficient than Claude coming up with a mock-up and me pointing and saying like that. Yeah, it saved a lot of time on both sides, rather than having this like multiple translations layer between idea to words to mock-up, iterate on the mock-up. At least I can get the broad strokes of what I'm going for into a visual format. And yeah, it's increased velocity quite a bit, design velocity quite a bit.
You're a pretty experienced person, so you can quickly accept and reject Claude's ideas. Have you noticed how more junior members of the team are interacting with these things? Do they have that taste to be able to do that, or maybe are they using it differently from you because of the different experience levels?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was just talking about that this morning with some colleagues. The concept of taste, like what is good taste or not good taste. I reject the idea of that, taste being so subjective. What I think is a more interesting conversation is, could AI come up with something that suits the taste of your ideal customer profile rather than the designer or the product person's individual taste? And it might even be contrary to their taste, right? Something that will produce a design that you wouldn't think of because maybe you yourself are not in your ideal customer profile. So that I think is a very interesting question. I personally have a strong sense of taste, and I'm opinionated, and I actually rely on AI to push back against that. I think that's a really productive thing.
That's funny. I get the sense that AI is making your job more fun. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I like new things. I like to do things in new ways. So just the novelty of it right now is very fun, minus those initial frustrations that I had where I just threw my hands up and said, this is junk. Nowadays, I'm really enjoying exploring different AI stacks and also different ways of using Claude, which is the principal LLM that I use. And so that part is fun, but as well, just drudgery is very quickly eliminated. Recently, I was without internet for a little while I was traveling, and I just decided to draft a bunch of stories in a notepad file. And I was just thinking about how much work it was going to be to take that and try and translate it into Atono user stories. And I was like, wait a second, I know how to do this. And it's literally like just a very quick prompt, done, no errors. It's really impressive. So yeah, probably saved me an hour just by thinking of, oh yeah, do that. And those hours add up.
Totally. Have you experienced, I think people are talking about LLM addiction, or you feel more productive, but actually you do more work because you're in that loop?
Yeah, I do find myself thinking of like different ways to use LLMs, like in maybe not even my core work, and probably just try it and see if it works. Maybe it doesn't work. And I haven't found myself like getting lazier about the things that matter. Like certainly, just to give you a quick example of a non-mission critical task, generating demo data was one of the very first things that I used LLMs for at Atono. You have to write tons of stories. When they're flashing by in a demo, it doesn't matter if they're perfect, right? They don't have to, as long as they don't have something embarrassing in there or something like that. That pseudo core work stuff, I like to accumulate those things. But yeah, when it comes to things that are like really important, I'm not tempted to just delegate that to an AI.
What would, if you imagine the models improving at the trajectory we've seen them, like what would make you comfortable delegating like that portion to AI?
It's a good question. What is the limit of what we would delegate? At the end of the day, in terms of being part of a startup or any enterprise, I wouldn't delegate like what we are passionate about. We're building Atono because we're passionate about that space. And if an AI were to tell me you should be passionate about something else, that doesn't really make sense to me. And similarly, there's accountability, right? If you're using an AI to accelerate what you do or to augment what you do or even ideate, but ultimately that AI is not accountable. If something is generated that nobody wants, that's not the AI's fault. That's the product person's fault. So that type of stuff, I don't think can ever be delegated. But then again, talk to me in 6 months, we'll see.
Yeah, I think the accountability liability question becomes really interesting once you start talking about agents. So I think there's one thing which is like AI as operating leverage for a human. But then once you start sending agents off into the wild to do tasks, then how does the liability flow back? And are we all just like liability hubs for all the agents that we create?
Yeah. And the verification part is interesting as well. Like agents act so quickly. How can you possibly validate what they've done as quickly? So that's interesting. And I will admit at this point, I'll probably be embarrassed later to say so, but when it comes to something like Claude Cowork, where you're granting it access to your local file system, I feel like, okay, it's this folder and I know what's in that folder and that's as far as things will go. I'm definitely not at the point where I'm like, yep, file system, go wild.
So you don't have an open claw setup that's just running autonomously in the background?
Not yet. Yep.
So what do you see as the current kind of bottleneck to productivity as you see people adopting AI in their workflows and speeding up? Like you said, getting to that 90% is so fast. Where do you see the bottlenecks forming today?
So there's obviously been some great advancements when it comes to memory. Claude won't be able to do something. I'll tell Claude, okay, this is the base URL I need for any links that you're going to send me. Okay, I'll remember that. That's remembered forever. That's wonderful. But more broad context, especially when it comes to developing a product and avoiding the like super generic designs that you might get back when Claude doesn't have that context. That is where we're going with Atono, providing LLMs product context that is specific to your product and is presented in an efficient form to an LLM to consume without using up all your tokens, input tokens. That's where I see that's probably where the like last mile issues can be ameliorated quite a bit. Just a funny thing, I don't know why this is, but when I do produce a design, and I'm iterating on that design, at some point, Claude decides to put in Windows 95 icons in for everything. I don't know why, but all of the design looks wonderful, except for these icons, which are very anachronistic. That's the type of product context, providing an icon catalog or at least a style guide to Claude so that the designs that are produced are specific to your product. Similarly, perhaps your product needs to have like stringent accessibility guidelines. Having that be just part of the context when any design is being produced so that you don't have to continuously iterate on that. That's where I see the bottleneck currently. Most of the designs that I produce certainly could not be like forklifted into the application. It would be a complete mismatch. So
Maybe Claude's trolling you. They're just checking whether you're paying attention.
Possibly. I've been a Mac user for a long time, so maybe it knows that. Yeah.
And so given where you sit and what Atono is focused on, like how do you imagine the future of product development to look, right? As we're adopting all these tools, how we're building products is not going to look like the old way. And so how are you positioning Atono to take advantage of that trend? And how should product leaders think about the mindset shifts that they need to make as more and more of these tools and people using it come online?
I'm going to just talk about a feature that we're developing right now called the product glossary, where I think there's a big issue is having a consistent nomenclature for your product and making sure that all aspects of your product conform to a simple set of terms, and your data model or your domain model naturally falls out of those terms. And one of the things that I have struggled with when it comes to the actual textual aspect of stories is that, again, that generic aspect of producing story suggestions, let's say, that are not germane to your data model, or using close terms but not exact terms. So we intend on enabling a more consistent production of story suggestions as well as UI designs using that sort of thing. We have lots of plans along in terms of the different types of context that you have when you're working with an LLM, but that's when it pops to mind. Of course, the story itself is you're writing a user story. That is super important piece of context that you want if you're trying to make a design for that story, but also, let's say, the containing epic or the body of stories that have happened before. And then you can infer things like what are some cross-cutting acceptance criteria that you include in stories, like maybe load testing. You have a product that's needs to be super responsive, or mission criticality, these types of things. Without that context, AI can only do so much, obviously. So yeah, it's really a way of reasoning about product. And I will say also what's good for AIs is good for humans and vice versa. So all of those artifacts and all of that infrastructure about what are the big important things about your product that differentiates it from other products, that's also useful for humans that are trying to get up to speed.
Got it. And so basically in the future, stories are like the central backbone of the product, and they provide the consistent guardrails, even as code is being regenerated around the stories.
Yep.
Is that fair to say?
Different levels. Stories are like the lowest level of detail. They are core. Epics being above those are more like maybe are talking about broad business values. And then above that, a glossary and a domain model for what your product is all about, so on and so forth. Going back to your question though, of like how things are changing and how things are going to change in the near future, I also think that like rapid prototyping means that you can try out way more designs at once, or way more product ideas. I think things are going to become a lot more experimental. The level of investment required to try out an idea has been reduced drastically. So I think what that's going to mean to the workflow is that product owners and designers are going to be able to produce lots of alternative designs. And maybe with that same level of efficiency on the engineering side, you'll see lots of A/B testing or a take up of A/B testing or ABCDEF testing. So yeah, I think things are going to get much more experimental.
And do you think that your user will continue to be like the human sitting in front of a computer interacting with your product? Or will it be humans talking to their agents that then interact with the Atono product? Because you mentioned you're like, oh man, it's going to take work to put these stories into Atono. And then you've sort of used AI to do that. So like, how do you think about whether the human is the end user hands on keyboard versus mediated by an agent?
Yeah, both, and probably everything in between as well. Lots of humans love to sit in front of UIs, bespoke UIs that are purpose built for their function. They're graphical, they're looking at charts, these types of things. Other humans are, depending on their use case with the application, like me, I want to load a bunch of stories in. I just do that using a prompt. In between is probably you're using a UI, or sorry, an agent wrapped in a UI that's specific for the task that you're doing. Maybe you generate a UI specific for your role that's just for you, that's using an MCP server behind the scenes. Yeah, I think it's very much unknown, but I think it's an all of the above situation.
And then I guess the output too, right? As people are starting to build products, thinking about agents as the ultimate end user rather than other humans. How do you think that changes how product building evolves?
I am a user of our MCP server every day. I think that it's not really an option for any application to not have that interface and to not have that interface have broad capabilities. So yeah, it's just like a non-starter to not be thinking about that as you're developing any aspect of your product. But like I say, a bespoke UI still has lots of value.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is pure speculation, but what do you think is like the timeline for adoption where we'll see the primary mode of interaction being agent versus human?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now.
Gotta make it a little spicy.
Yeah. Will my mom ever use AI as a preferred mode? I think not.
But what if she's just talking to her phone? She's just talking to her phone. It's not AI. She's just talking into the phone. It's AI behind the cover.
Yeah. You don't know my mom. Not even that. But anyway, a reluctant person like me 6 months ago, not using it, to now being almost an evangelist. This happened very quickly. Yeah. I think what needs to happen is the industry has to overcome the folks' fears, the social aspects of everyone's job's going to be eliminated using AI. It's a real thing. The counter argument being, we'll just be more productive and there'll be the same number of jobs. Everyone will be more productive. I don't think people are buying that completely. I do think that there's also the Terminator movies, which everyone knows really well. There are both rational and irrational fears about AI advancement and how long things will take before we have very safe AIs and very useful AIs and friendly AIs that everyone's willing to use. It's very hard to say. I guess it would depend on what is the first major AI incident that everyone points to and say, see, that's why we don't use AI. So I'm not going to predict if or when that will happen.
That's an interesting. But then I think people will develop ways to deal with it.
Absolutely. That is a major focus of most AI companies, I think, is what is the safety aspect of these? So hopefully they figure that out quick.
And I guess in terms of, you talked a little bit about your journey from skeptic to near evangelist. Are there any best practices you could share with our audience around how you've encouraged the usage inside your own company or with people that you know, how to get them over that initial friction and skepticism?
I can't say that I've been 100% successful in that, but I will tell you where I have been successful. So I think just sharing the results of, for example, we were working on a better way of predicting sprint progress. So for people that are still using Scrum or will be using Scrum for years to come and looking at burn downs, there's a classic projection line of how your burn down is going. I worked on a prototype of a way of doing that takes into account seasonality of sprints. So typically things go slower at the beginning, they go faster at the end. Typically people don't work on weekends. There's a whole aspect of that, very simple projection lines don't account for. And just sharing within whatever 20 minutes, there was a prototype of that and saying, hey, this happened in 20 minutes. It's actually looking pretty good. And it's a kinder, gentler burn down. So it doesn't panic the team for half the sprint. And then just giving examples, I think, and presenting them. Actually, this was not too much work. That probably would have taken me day or days to come up with that prototype otherwise. So
seeing is believing.
Share success stories and include visuals. Yeah. Don't just say it, but share the results.
Yeah, definitely. I had a similar experience. I ran a hackathon for the broader team a couple weeks ago. And I basically just walked them through the prompts it took me to build a homework app for my kid.
Yeah.
And at the end of 90 minutes, every person had shipped something working on their local machine that directly helped them with their job.
Amazing.
And so they went from, I'm not a coder, I don't, to, hey, look, I got the thing running. And the funniest thing was every time they would ask me a question, I'd be like, ask Claude. They're like, what should I do? I was like, just ask Claude. They're like, I don't understand. Just ask Claude. And it was more like this, I don't know, permissioning, like just being like, it's okay not to know. It's okay. Just keep asking Claude until you understand what's happening. And then you can also say, Claude, do it for me. And then Claude will do stuff. But I think that was like an unlock. And I was telling someone, I was like, you know how like little kids just press all the buttons on a remote? And adults are like, what do I do? Which button should I press? And kids just don't have this problem. And I feel like interacting with AI is like being a kid and pressing all the buttons again.
Exactly. And not being afraid to do it.
So it's like an interesting transformation. Well, Tobias, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences, and also really exciting to learn about what you've got in store with Atono, because I do think as the cost of writing code goes down, the importance of stories only goes up. And having that sort of system of record to keep everyone, humans and agents alike, aligned on how the product should be developed is just really crucial. And that's all.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.